It has been only a few months since the Quality Management System Regulation, or the QMSR, went into effect for medical devices in the United States. And now all medical device companies doing business in the US are expected to comply. We are already seeing FDA changing their inspection methodology. They have announced this risk-based inspection method and already issuing 483 observations focused explicitly on deficiencies in the risk management process. So, what does this all mean to medical device manufacturers, whether small, medium, or large? This is a new world in which we can expect a new approach to FDA inspections. Hi, everyone. My name is Naveen Agarwal, and I want to welcome all of you to this very special episode of the Let's Talk Risk discussion, where my guest once again is the wonderful Michelle Lott. And those of us who are very active in the QA/RA field, Michelle needs no introduction. She is the strategic advisor and principal and founder at Lean RAQA, has been in the industry for many, many years. We have had Michelle for multiple conversations on Let's Talk Risk. The links to those podcast recordings will be below in this show notes. But today with Michelle, we're going to focus on the recent FDA observations in 483s since the QMSR went into effect, and what her read is on how the FDA inspections are going to evolve in the future and how manufacturers can prepare themselves for this new world. With that, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again. It's always fun conversations with you.
So, Michelle, it has been only a few months and we are already seeing FDA take action against medical device manufacturers in fees according to what they said they would do under QMSR, right? So, we have already seen many of those. Let us talk about that today. What are you seeing on your end that is kind of noteworthy right now?
Well, first off, there's a huge shift in what and how that they are writing these against. You know, in the past, the top five were consistently CAPA, complaints, design controls, purchasing controls, and there was one other thing, not at the top of my head right now. And that was like pretty much year over year. It was that same group being a different non-conforming product. That was the other one, but maybe in a different order, but always those five. Well, now those are like some of the lowest ones that they are writing against, and they've switched to writing them against the sections that call out risk specifically. So, for example, there was like 133 total citations. 27 of them were associated with either risk-based approach, or one of the feedback clauses in Section 8.
Yeah. So they are citing specific clauses of ISO 13485, and you are noticing that some of them are explicitly for deficiencies in the risk management, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So it is fast. I would say FDA has moved quite quickly in this direction and starting to apply the 13485 clause framework and using a process-based approach. So you are right. There have been many citations. So I will share with folks that I have seen. There are three particular clauses that they are citing over and over again. The first one, of course, is 7.1, which is risk management in product realization. The next one, as you rightly mentioned, is feedback from 8.2.1 as input to risk management. We'll talk about this also in a lot of detail. And the one that is really interesting, which I think has a lot of implication for even management responsibility, is 4.1.2b, where it is the expectation that a risk-based approach will be applied to the control of appropriate quality management system processes. So they are finding deficiencies in these three big areas already. And that's, in my view, I think it's telling us a lot that FDA is going after the entire QMS, not just system by system like CAPA or design control or change control or purchasing control, right? They're going across the entire system.
Yes. Well, and the ISO 1345 really opens some doors that they didn't have so clearly and explicitly called out in the QSR. For example, the QSR only called out risk one time, and it wasn't really clear if it was talking about overall risk of the product or risk when you're using software. It was very ambiguous. And so now the FDA has got all of these occasions to call out three specific clauses that they could write against, depending on what they see, which they really didn't have before. And I think that lack of, even though that was always their expectation, but that lack of things to write it up against, there was a disconnect there, whether it was their expectation or not.
I always felt reading the warning letters under the QSR that FDA was finding problems with risk management, but to your point, they were limited in how they could write it up. So they had to force fit into this risk analysis sort of requirement in a design validation. They had to force fit it. But if you read the language, it was very clear to me that they were pointing out to process based deficiencies in the risk management system to begin with. So now the change is that they can cite explicitly where the problem is. So let's talk about that. 7.1.
Yep.
What would be the expectations under 7.1 beyond just documentation?
Well, obviously, you have to have the risk management process. And so, one of the interesting things about 7.1 is that it calls out processes within a process. So, like, not just design and development, but then what about the manufacturing process and maybe further processing like sterilization and so forth, that you might need to conduct risk management, like many risk managements all along the way throughout the product life cycle to constitute risk management for the product.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's product realization, right? So that means it starts even with the raw materials and services on the front end and also post production.
Concept to commercialization and beyond.
So let's play this out. Most people will say, yes, we have a risk management procedure. We have written it according to ISO 14971. Do you see still any holes there or any vulnerabilities there where a manufacturer is just taking a simple approach? Like, I'm just going to follow 14971 and write my procedure, risk management procedure. Do you see any kind of gaps or vulnerabilities there that we should be aware of?
Well, 14971 really is very product specific. While it does capture the life cycle, 14971 in itself isn't going to like help you identify process validations that might be mitigating some risks or something that could impact safety. And it might not even be product specific, in some cases. So I think that there's some there's the bits between the initial concept development and risk management throughout the design and post after commercialization in feedback. You've got that everything that, like you mentioned before, the raw materials, everything from the raw materials coming into manufacturing until they ship and during shipping. I think that 14971 isn't really clear about risk management around the bookend, besides those bookends.
Yeah, because primarily 14971 looks at risk as risk of harm at the end to the patient. Now it's connected to everything we do in our process, but it's not explicitly defined. So it seems to me that if you write your risk management procedure just for 14971, I don't think you're going to fulfill the expectation of 13485 from a process-based approach.
No. And you're also not going to fulfill the intent, because now we have not just product risk and process risk, we've got risk-based approach risk, which again, that talks to that part of the life cycle in between those bookends, that everything in there needs its own separate risk-based approach considerations.
So we'll get into that 4.1.2 in just a minute about risk-based approach. But let's continue talking about 7.1, because it seems to me that if FDA writes up a 483 observation that your risk management process is not adequate according to 7.1, maybe they may be telling us that maybe it's not specific enough in certain process areas or certain steps of the manufacturing process or the life cycle where you have clarity about risk assessments. And they may just cite you by saying, hey, your risk management procedure is not adequate. So this could be quite confusing to manufacturers in terms of where they should go and act, right? So it'll depend upon the 483 observation. And I think it's maybe too soon to share some examples. I have not seen that, but maybe the warning letters, when they come out, we can figure out exactly why FDA is citing under 7.
Yep. And I think that that's going to be I think that's quickly skyrocketing to the top of the pile of things that they write 43s about. And I think, in some of the data that you and I kind of mined to get these initial conclusions, what we don't have, we have a short description and a long description, but what we don't
Yeah.
have is all the list of the objective evidence
Yeah.
that they use to support those conclusions. So I think once we start seeing what records were they looking at or what processes were they looking at specifically throughout that section 7, which covers all of that actual physical product realization, once we see the type of records that they were writing it against, I think we're going to have the next layer of conclusions that we can kind of extract from the data.
Yeah. And I think we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more in detail, more specific examples when we have clarity. So, Michelle, let's continue. 4.1.2 is where I think there's a big deal about risk-based approach, and it applies across the QMS. It's right in the first part of 13485. And if FDA is telling us in these fees that your risk-based approach to QMS is not adequate or appropriate, tell us, how should we understand that language? What does that mean?
Yep. Just that concept in general is a bit ambiguous. And so the example that FDA and others keep citing is like for your supplier controls process. If you have different levels of suppliers, like a critical supplier might be a contract manufacturer or critical component, that having different levels of control for those high risk areas is an example of a critical supplier, a medium critical, and a low risk or low supplier. That's an example of the risk-based approach. Okay, and that one seems a little bit more obvious because
Mhm.
industry's used to having different controls around like critical suppliers, but there's not just like a lot of clarity of what does that mean for other processes, like say receiving an inspection or in process inspection. Like what does that risk-based approach look like in some of those other very specific subsystems in product realization?
So, what I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of ambiguity around this whole notion of risk based approach
Mhm.
itself, and maybe it'll evolve. But let me share with you
And
some thoughts I have, and maybe see how you feel about that. When I listened to the recent FDA town hall where they talked about the QMSR and risk based inspection, one thing kind of caught my attention where in this context, they are saying really that, and I'm paraphrasing really, is that they are going to be looking for how you are making risk based decisions and judgments to make sure that the product remains safe and effective. That's what I heard. And what it tells me is that it's not enough to just document everything. They'll be after how you are making decisions, how you are making judgments.
exactly.
Does that sound like, if I am I reading it correctly there, or is there something
No,
more to
I
it?
I think that you're reading it correctly, but the problem is that to render a decision about how you're making decisions is very subjective, especially when FDA is clear that the manufacturer is expected to be the expert on their own products and processes. Well, then it becomes an argument between the inspector, who probably doesn't know as much about your product, its features, your process controls, etc. And so you might get into a more theoretical or scientific debate, if you
Mm-hmm.
will,
Mm-hmm.
over that you did exercise appropriate controls, but they just didn't understand your product enough to understand why those controls were or were not in place. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And, it happens even today, right? During audits and inspections, maybe not as much in FDA inspections, as much in like notified body audits or other audits. We get into this discussion with the auditor. To me, it seems like auditor is second guessing the decision or the judgment made. And, I've been on both sides of the table. I've been in as an auditee facing these auditors or also auditing people. And so have you. It seems to me that that happens when the criteria by which decisions are made are not clear and it seems vague and arbitrary. That's what my experience is. So the
Mhm.
lesson I hear is that 4.1.2, to avoid any findings, people have to be very careful about what criteria are being used to make the decision and whether they are
Mhm.
documenting those criteria or not. That would be the way I would look at this. And any thoughts on
Right.
that, Michelle?
Yeah. So what I would do is I would take all of my procedures and I would add some specific wording about what in that procedure constitutes a risk-based approach.
Hmm. Hmm.
Say it's incoming inspection
Hmm.
and you're using a particular AQL, that there's a justification for the AQL that you chose, and that you've got switching rules in place. Like if it goes this many lots, we can go down to this many pieces of inspection, or if we get this a failure, we have to move back up a level. That might be an example of a risk-based approach, but it might not be something top of mind
Hmm.
to the company, because those types of things are just, it's just such a controlled process, and it's done pretty much the same way day in and day out, that they may not be thinking about that process in terms of, wait, I do have controls in place. And so I think there's going to be a lot of re-education about how you talk about things
Hmm.
that you've
Hmm.
been doing all along.
Yeah, and we'll have to be a little bit more specific about what criteria we are using to make those decisions. Now, not everything can be written down. We know that, right? Have to be some ambiguity, some uncertainty. So I think that we may also need to be careful about when we document a decision to also note and maybe annotate the level of uncertainty in that decision. What are some of the random things that we haven't understood or characterized? And if there's a lot of uncertainty, we'll be expected to have some action in place. We'll monitor a little bit more and gather more
Mhm.
data. So I see a lot of room for, I think, conversations and heartache in 4.1.2 for manufacturers and also auditors and investigators. I see a lot of that. And the second thing that I want to discuss with you under this is, how do you feel about if an auditor or an FDA investigator pursues a lead through 4.1.2? I have a feeling that they might go all the way to management responsibility much quicker than they would from any other direction. Does that sound
Yeah.
kind of reasonable to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you tied into the thing that was on the top of my mind, was management review and internal audit are
Mhm.
now free game, and they've
Yeah.
never been inspected by the FDA before. So, so that's an area where industry doesn't know where they're going to go with it or how they're going to focus on it. But you're exactly right. That management with executive or top management, I think is their new term. How are they involved with the QMS? Well, they'll be able to tell from management review the types of data that they were looking at, the types of conclusions that they were making, the
Hmm.
types of action items that they were issuing afterwards, how they escalate or de escalate something. And then management review always has to have a statement about the effectiveness of the quality management system.
Hmm.
But also, there's an expectation, and I know 14971 is not codified. We'll
Hmm.
talk about that in a minute, but it calls out that your risk management processes need to also be reviewed basically within
Yes.
management review, is
Yes.
where we
Yes.
put it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Michelle, this is so important. I want to stay on this topic a little bit more. Let's share one more example. And my favorite example is how CAPA data is presented in management reviews. Now, if we
Mhm.
continue to stay focused on CAPA timeliness, closure rates, those are reasonably good metric because we want timely action. But is that sufficient? Is that enough to indicate a risk-based approach to CAPA?
Exactly, because if you really have a critical CAPA that is like directly tied to safety and performance, it might not be reasonable to get it closed in 60 days or 90 days. So it kind of logically seems a little bit opposite.
Hmm.
So for complicated CAPAs, you may need like a year from start to corrective actions, validations of it, and then effectiveness verification. So I think the most important thing is that the CAPA looks living in some way. If it's like open for a long time, that's okay, as long as you have got the narrative
Yeah.
going a little along the way, like regular updates to the CAPA to show how it's progressing. But so I think that there are going to be systems where the definition of risk-based approaches might seem a little opposite of what your initial perception may be for a
Yeah. Yeah.
metric for it.
Yeah. I mean, in this particular case, the example you shared, I've actually lived through that. There was something that we worked on that lasted for 2 years. It was a major project. And all along the way, we had to show progress and what we are learning, what we are implementing, what we are. It's almost like a research project in some cases. But you have to
Hmm.
show progress and document that in your management review or any other review you want. But here, I think I would like folks to start understanding that timeliness metrics are not the only thing that we have to worry about. We have to worry about effectiveness metrics also. So
Yeah.
if we are closing CAPAs and they are not effective, that's not a risk-based approach to CAPA. And I think
Hmm.
they will go right into the management review from there. So
Yeah.
that's what I want us to kind of really start thinking about. What should be the right KPIs to track in the management reviews? Not just
Right.
timeliness, but also effectiveness metrics.
Right. And if you are pushing for CAPA closure time as your primary metric just to demonstrate timeliness, you may inadvertently maybe cut corners or not do as in-depth of investigation to root cause as the issue might warrant. For instance, I've worked on a CAPA for a resuscitator bag that was kind of falling apart at one of the press fits. And, we did a root cause analysis, our initial root cause. We found three or four things that stuck, that stacking tolerances from the moment it's molded to the assembly and beyond, there was problems at all of those layers. Well, once we fixed those problems and we monitored it for a brief while, we closed it too early because other root causes then showed themselves. That even though they did some monitoring, the monitoring they did not last long enough for the issue to resurface.
Michelle, great discussion here. Let's move on to the next category that we find in the recent freeze, which is 8.2.1, where they are saying that the feedback and input to risk management process is not adequate. So they are finding gaps in connecting the feedback that we are getting from the market back to risk management. So this is to me like clause 10 in ISO 14971 and clause 8 in 13.5. If that is not managed well, this is exactly what we will see. What else do you understand from some of the findings that FDA may come up with in 8.2.1?
So again, some of the more discussed examples that they've presented about what that looks like in feedback is, say, in your complaint management system, that you get reports of particular failure mode. And then during that investigation, that complaint, does the investigator review the risk management file for
Mhm.
that product? Then they are supposed to look at, does the failure mode exist in the FMEA? Is it contained at all? And then is it got the right severity or occurrence? Then does its occurrence need to be changed? Like,
Mhm.
did you underestimate it? Did you overestimate it? And then, therefore, looking at that with that piece of feedback data, your risk management file stays living. It stays a process, part of the process of your other quality management processes. On the graphic that they have in the new inspection methodology that they recently released, risk is at the very center. Well, patients are at the center, and it has risk wrapped around the patients, and all roads go back to risk management and the patient.
So basically, it means that we have to very tightly integrate our risk management with post market surveillance and other feedback mechanisms that we have, and then feed all that information back into other processes of the quality management system. Right. So let's see
Yep.
what we do today. Right. Typically, what we do is we do complaints handling, we do decisions about investigations or not, we do a lot of record keeping, we do adverse events reporting. Once in a while, we might do some trending and monitoring. This is my understanding of what we are doing today. Where do you
Mhm.
see, Michelle, some gaps in this that we might be vulnerable from FDA's new viewpoint?
Yep. So going back again to the new inspection methodology, FDA has directly referenced the term signal associated with for cause audits. Now, it's always had for cause audits, but this is the first time I see the specific term signal worked into something that they are going to specifically be looking for, not only on the data that they have internally, but are you looking for signaling data
Mhm.
as well? So you're probably one of the leading experts on signals and how to recognize them and deal with them. So what do you think about those
Mhm.
three occurrences? And because it is kind of vague
Yeah, it is vague.
about how, yeah.
But let's talk about that a little bit. They're not saying complaints. They're not saying adverse events. They're not using this terminology that we are so familiar with. They're using signals. So if FDA becomes aware of a potential safety signal from their data mining, this is how I read it. They could come for a for cause inspection. It doesn't have to be that
Mhm.
suddenly your adverse event rate has gone up or something else is happening, but their
It doesn't
understanding of
even
what
have to
the
be, it doesn't even have to be
right,
your own adverse event.
correct.
So that's why it's so important to also monitor your competitors. Are they having recalls? Are they having adverse events? You know, is it adverse events that they're reporting or is being reported from the field? But also, this is where industry is going to be a little bit blind to
Mhm.
information that only the FDA is privy.
Yeah. Well, so let's play this out a little bit. You gave an example of a failure mode that we come across in our post market information or data. And now we have to connect to the risk management file. In most cases, people may not even respond to a single occurrence of that failure mode, even if it's new. They might say, oh, it doesn't come into our Pareto. We do a Pareto of top 10, it doesn't show up. But what I'm reading between the lines from FDA, Michelle, would love to hear from you, is they're saying, no, 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 this could be a signal. A single event could be a signal if it is new enough, unique enough. And oh, by the way, we have seen it before in your competitor's product. It could be a signal for you that we would expect you to analyze. That's how I'm reading it.
It certainly could be that. And again, you know, when we were talking a little earlier about sometimes it becomes opens the door for things to be a subjective discussion with the inspector instead of a objective discussion. And so they may come in knowing more than you know.
Mhm.
And then so how are you supposed to know when something should have been triggered or escalated?
Yeah.
And
So,
then also, if that's a perfect example of when you might need to open a preventive action
mhm.
CAPA as opposed to a
Yes.
corrective action CAPA. So,
So let's double click on that because such an important topic. In 13485, CA, corrective action, is different from PA, preventive action. So first,
mhm.
I think it'll be a big change in mindset. We cannot talk about CAPA anymore. We talk about CA and PA. So I love the example that you gave is that it could be a new preventive action project or a new preventive action. I don't know how you're going to do it in your procedures or in your EQMS, but the expectation would be that you have a new PA in place or investigation in place.
You know, for a long time, ISO auditing bodies had started sometimes flat out writing it up, but sometimes, but at least making a comment or an observation that the company needs to have a preventive action open that they can or have in the previous year
Mhm.
had a preventive action that they could review to see that you were fulfilling both the corrective and the preventive part of the actions. So,
Mhm.
yeah, they were giving out observations against industry for not having a preventive action.
So, obviously, Michelle, we are talking about so many unknowns right now. I can understand
Yep.
that there might be a lot of anxiety and
Yep.
worry among the manufacturers. If FDA shows up, how are they going to handle that? So, I want to spend some time with you understanding, what you have understood from the new risk-based inspection methodology that FDA came up with. What are some of the top 2 or 3 insights that you can share with us?
Well, I tell you, for my entire career, I always thought QSIT was a very solid audit methodology because it really gets you into the interfaces between the quality systems better. And what I'm think is deficient in the new inspection methodology is it's more protocol and procedure about how the FDA's supposed to do some of the logistics around it. It's not an actual how to do the
Mhm.
inspection
Mhm.
like QSIT was.
Mhm.
There's no checklist, guidelines, approach that where you could ask, okay, if I ask this question, then I go here, then I go there, then I jump over to this quality system. It doesn't have the clarity on how to actually do the audit that like QSIT did.
Mhm.
So you know, me and all my colleagues think it's really it that as far as to industry to understand how the FDA is going to approach the inspection, it's delinquent.
So it seems to me that they are saying to us that they could go anywhere. Like
Exactly.
the model that they have shown in that inspection manual is, you described it, patient at the center, risk management in the center, and all these lines are connecting it to different quality management system processes that they will look into and some other requirements. They could go in any different direction based on where their primary concern is from the patient point of view. So I think this is the key to keep in mind. If they ask you a question, we have to understand what is the patient concern they have in mind that they want us to answer. That would be the
Right.
way I think we should look at it.
One thing, I'm making a note on something you just said. I'm going to follow up on. So, critical thinking, that's the other one of those terms. If
Yes.
you just say critical thinking, that's also very subjective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a handful of times in the new inspection methodology that the way that the inspector is supposed to choose different things is through their critical thinking
Correct.
and their judgment on the manufacturer's risk management process. So I just feel like this transition to the QMSR and ISO 1345 has so much more ambiguity in it that it is going to vary from inspector to inspector, from company to company. I just feel like it has added so many unknown unknowns and known unknowns.
Yeah.
Donald Rumsfeld's quote is
Yes.
one of my favorite ever.
Yeah.
Apply it to everything in our industry. So, but
I
that's
think
it. I think manufacturers are going to really have to start talking to each other to see how did the inspector carry this out at your site versus they may have done it totally different under a different inspector at somebody else's site.
so. Let's go there. Let's go there and talk about how we can prepare ourselves for this new kind of inspection world. I think you are certainly reflecting a lot of concerns and anxiety that many manufacturers are probably feeling right now. And those who have already received FDA for an inspection, I'm sure they have gone through it. So the point you are trying to make is that we have to become a little bit more open and collaborative and communicative about our experiences to the extent we can, without giving up proprietary
Yeah.
information. I want to ask you, how can QA/RA professionals within companies prepare their organization? What new skill set they will have to develop to prepare their companies for this new environment? Let's talk about that a little bit.
I think that the best thing that the industry could do for itself is just suck up every bit of data or information that they can to get their own signal, if you will, about where the FDA is going to go. Go to every town hall, participate in forums, go through a couple tools, get very tool specific about, like, say, to do a root cause investigation. What are all the tools at their disposal? Which tool is the right thing for what type of event? And have people comfortable talking about not just the decisions they made, but the tools that they used to get there. That we just didn't pull this conclusion out of thin air, that these were the processes or these were the decisions along the way that led us to this conclusion or this place.
I think you're right on spot here, because going to town halls, listening to how FDA is responding to questions, reading between the lines, looking up fees, looking up warning letters, looking up FDA's own guidance documents or other publications, safety alerts that they share. So what I'm hearing you say is that all of us will have to become a little bit more open to understanding the external world more than what we are doing today. We are mostly internally focused.
So this one just came up to me because I've been preaching the preamble to the QSR for ever. Well, now we still have a preamble to the QMSR where FDA addressed all of industry's comments to the QMSR. The actual QMSR is probably around 10 pages. QMSR comments and preamble is like 90 pages. So the whole thing is like 101. So you have 90 pages of comment response, comment response. You need to read those. You need to prepare for FDA's expectation. Now, there are several things that they said we did not codify this, so it is not rulemaking. But if you want to know what we meant when we said risk then you need to read 14971 because this is what we meant. It doesn't mean you have to comply with it because you can always come up with your own methodology as long as you can prove it's equivalent or better than something that's recognized or industry standard. But who's gonna sit there and make up an entirely brand new risk management process
Yeah.
to get a more risk management process?
Yes, I think you made such a great suggestion here. I want to double click on that. The preamble to the QMSR, where FDA's commentary to all the comments that were posted, is so insightful. And let's share a couple of tangible actions people can take. And I would love for you to give your feedback and maybe add to it somehow. What we have started doing on Let's Talk Risk now, every week we post a discussion. We call it QMSR Quick Take, a discussion about one comment from the preamble. And we have done it for the last 20, 25 weeks. We'll continue doing it. But the idea is this: people who are inside the company can do the same. And I would encourage them to take one comment, for example, that stands out to them, do a lunch and learn about it, and discuss amongst your colleagues what that means for you and how you can prepare yourself to answer FDA's questions related to this issue that might be relevant for you. So what I'm hearing you say is that thing we can do is lean on what is happening in the external world, what people are doing. You are doing a lot of good stuff, posting so much good content on LinkedIn. But internally also, let's create these communities of practices where we can take the initiative, and doesn't take any money. It just takes the initiative. Hey, everybody has to eat lunch. Why don't we just sit down together and discuss one topic that could be relevant to us? Any other tangible suggestions you'd like to add, Michelle, that has worked for you?
I think that that's a great idea. I think to kind of inside those conversations to have, okay, what does this mean to us? Or if I say this and I don't think of just our company, what does that look like? Like one of those comments, and not only is it a comment in the QMSR, it's mentioned at least twice in the new inspection methodology, is a culture of quality. How do you take maybe some of these terms that are used that just seem wide open to it could be something different to everybody, and look at it from a different, not only from a different perspective of people, but a different perspective from industry or organizational coaches, all those things, to understand what does it mean for you guys, but also what does it mean that the FDA may be expecting.
Yeah.
And so just kind of like take it and just having a broader open mind and a bigger dialogue about some of these things, I think is going to be real important for people to understand how to move forward.
Wonderful, Michelle. We have such a fascinating conversation on this topic. It's a rapidly moving target, is it not? We don't know much about it.
Exactly.
So a lot of challenges, but also I think, as we have discussed, many opportunities for individuals to contribute. Michelle, let's bring this back together. Can we maybe share one or two key takeaways? What are some of the 2-3 key takeaways that you would like to share with people today?
The QMSR comments. I think that is the most concrete place where we can extrapolate what this is going to be like. So between the comments and the inspection methodology, and then the other thing I'm going to say is the practical guide. So those are my 3 things: comments, methodology, and practical guide to ISO 13485. And if that one's not free, but it's worth it.
Definitely. And if you are in this role, I would second that. Definitely get that. It's worth the investment that you will make in your own career and also for your organization. Michelle, thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. Every time you and I meet, we talk about so many different things and we learn from each other. So thank you again. And I wish you all the best in your current venture and activities.
I look forward to having another one of these conversations when we get more data about what's going on.
Yes. Okay, Michelle, thank you so much.